The ship moved slowly toward the massive station that floated in the darkness of space. Ambassador Daniel Ortega stood at the window and watched as Verith Prime grew larger with each passing minute. The station was ancient. Its metal skin was covered with the marks of 1,000 years. Lights blinked from 1,000,000 windows, and ships of every shape and size moved around. It like insects around a hive. Daniel had spent his whole life preparing for this moment. He had studied every known alien language. He had memorized the customs of 12 different species. He had practiced his speech 100 times. But now, standing here and looking at the home of the Galactic Council, he felt very small. Lisa Monroe walked up beside him. She was young, barely 30, but she had a sharp mind and a calm way of speaking that made people listen. She would serve as his aide during the negotiations ahead. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "They've had a long time to build it." Behind them, Captain Kevin Reyes checked his uniform one more time. He was a military man, straight-backed and serious. He had seen combat on 3 different colonies and had the scars to prove it. But today his job was simple. Stand behind the ambassador. Look strong. Say nothing unless asked. The ship docked with a gentle bump. The doors opened and the smell of recycled air filled their noses. It was cold, much colder than Earth ships, and the light had a blue tint that made everything look slightly unreal. A creature waited for them at the end of the docking tunnel. It stood on 4 thin legs and had a body covered in hard brown plates. Its head was small, with 2 large black eyes that never seemed to blink. This was a Kethra, one of the insect species that held a seat on the council. "Welcome to Verith Prime," the Kethra said. Its voice was a series of clicks and hums that a small device on its chest translated into words. "I am Assistant Secretary Chuckled. I will guide you to your quarters." Daniel stepped forward and offered a small bow as he had been taught. "Thank you, Assistant Secretary. I am Ambassador Daniel Ortega of Earth. This is my aide, Lisa Monroe, and our military attaché, Captain Kevin Reyes." Chuckled's eyes moved over each of them in turn. There was no warmth in that gaze, no curiosity, only a kind of tired patience, like a teacher forced to deal with very slow students. "Follow me," Chuckled said, and turned away without another word. They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with symbols and pictures that told stories Daniel could not understand. Other creatures passed them, some walking, some floating, some moving in ways that made no sense to human eyes. Most of them barely glanced at the human delegation. A few stared for a moment, then looked away with expressions that might have been amusement. Lisa leaned close to Daniel. "They're not exactly rolling out the red carpet?" "We're new here," Daniel replied softly. "We have to earn their respect." Kevin said nothing, but his jaw was tight. The quarters they were given were small and plain. The furniture was designed for bodies very different from human ones, and the beds were hard slabs of something that felt like cold stone. The window looked out at a gray wall. "These are the quarters for developing species," Chuckled explained. "You will be comfortable here." Daniel kept his face calm. "Thank you, Assistant Secretary. When will we be able to address the Council?" "Your petition has been received. You will be scheduled for a hearing when time permits. This may take several weeks, perhaps months." Chuckled paused at the door. "I suggest you use this time to observe, to learn. The Council has existed for 12,000 years. You are very new to this. Very new indeed." The door closed, and they were alone. Kevin finally spoke. "Developing species. They put us in the basement." Lisa looked around the bare room. "At least they let us in the building." Daniel sat down on one of the hard beds and let out a long breath. "This is what we expected. We knew they would look down on us. Humanity has been traveling the stars for 80 years. These species have been doing it for thousands. To them, we're children. Children they don't seem to like very much," Kevin muttered. "It doesn't matter if they like us," Daniel said. "What matters is that we're here. We have a seat at the table, even if it's the smallest seat in the room. We show them who we are. We show them what we can offer. And slowly, over time, we earn our place. The weeks that followed were hard. The human delegation attended council sessions as observers, sitting in a small balcony far from the main floor. They watched as the elder species debated trade routes and territorial disputes and resource allocation. The discussions were slow and formal, filled with references to agreements made centuries ago, and grudges that had been nursed for even longer. Daniel requested meetings with representatives of the major species. Most of his requests were ignored. A few were answered with polite refusals. Only the Moradi, a species of beings who lived in water-filled suits, agreed to meet with him. Their representative, a creature named Deleth, seemed genuinely curious about Earth. "Your world is mostly water," Deleth said, her voice bubbling through her suit's translator. "This is interesting to us." "We've always felt a connection to the ocean," Daniel replied. "Our earliest ancestors came from the sea." Deleth's large eyes blinked slowly. "Perhaps there is something to discuss between our peoples. But you should know, Ambassador, that the Council does not change quickly. You are asking for things that take time." "Much time. We understand," Daniel said. "We're patient." Deleth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Patience is good, but do not confuse patience with hope. The elder species have their ways. They do not welcome change, and they do not welcome those who might bring it." Daniel thanked her for her honesty. When she left, Lisa looked at him with worried eyes. "She's warning us," Lisa said. "I know," Daniel replied. "But we're not here to give up. We're here to try." 3 months after their arrival, the human delegation was finally scheduled to present their petition to the full council. Daniel prepared his speech with care. He practiced it every night. He believed in every word. He still believed that if he could just make them understand, everything would change. He was wrong. The council chamber was vast. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into shadow. The seats were arranged in a great circle, with the 12 elder species sitting in positions of honor at the center. The human delegation sat far to the side, in seats that were clearly added as an afterthought. Daniel stood at the speaking platform and delivered his petition. He spoke of Earth's history. He spoke of humanity's journey from caves to cities to the stars. He spoke of their desire to join the galactic community as full partners, to trade and learn and grow together. The council listened in silence. When Daniel finished, High Speaker Vorn rose from his seat. Vorn was a Velthari, one of the crystalline beings who had founded the council 12,000 years ago. His body was made of living crystal, pale blue and shimmering with inner light. He was ancient beyond human understanding. "We have heard your petition," Vorn said. His voice was like wind moving through glass chimes. "The council will consider it and respond in due time. You may return to your quarters." That was all. No questions. No discussion. No acknowledgement of anything Daniel had said. Lisa touched his arm as they left the chamber. "You did well, did I?" Daniel asked. I couldn't tell if they were even listening. They were listening, but not in the way Daniel had hoped over the months that followed. The human delegation learned what it meant to be a developing species. In the eyes of the Galactic Council, every proposal they made was dismissed. When Lisa presented a new system for organizing trade routes that could save fuel and time, the Kethra representative clicked his mandibles in a pattern that the translator rendered as laughter. "Perhaps your people should master basic navigation before teaching us how to fly," he said. The other representatives made sounds of amusement. Lisa's proposal was rejected without review when Captain Kevin Reyes offered to share military tactics from Earth's long history of warfare. The Soan Dominion representative, a massive reptilian creature named Kralveth, let out a hissing laugh. "You spent 10,000 years fighting yourselves over patches of dirt," Kralveth said. "We mastered war before your ancestors climbed down from trees. What could you possibly teach us?" Kevin's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. Daniel had ordered them all to remain calm, no matter what. The worst moment came when Daniel requested humanitarian aid for a human colony that had been struck by a solar flare. The colony had lost most of its power systems. 300,000 people were struggling to survive with failing life support and dwindling food supplies. Daniel presented the request to the Council's Emergency Committee. He explained the situation clearly. He asked for ships, supplies, and technical assistance. The committee debated for 2 hours. In the end, they allocated a sum so small that it would barely cover the fuel costs for a single rescue ship. Perhaps, the committee chair said, your species should learn to plan for such events. The elder races do not suffer from poor preparation. Daniel wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that his people were dying while they sat in their comfortable chairs and made jokes. But he kept his face calm. He thanked them for their consideration. He walked out of the chamber with his back straight. That night, in their small quarters, Kevin finally lost his temper. They're laughing at us, he said, pacing back and forth. Every time we open our mouths, they laugh. We're a joke to them. A sideshow. Lisa sat on her bed, staring at the floor. Maybe we should go home. Maybe this was a mistake. Daniel leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He was tired. More tired than he had ever been in his life. But he wasn't ready to give up. No, he said quietly. We stay. We keep trying. Eventually, they'll see what we have to offer. And if they don't? Kevin demanded. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have an answer to give. A week later, Daniel received an unexpected visit. A young Marathi came to their quarters late at night. Her name was Seneth, and she worked as a junior aide to the Marathi representative. She was nervous, her eyes darting around as if she expected to be caught at any moment. I should not be here, Seneth said. But I thought you should know something. Daniel invited her inside. What is it? Seneth hesitated. Then she spoke, her words coming out in a rush. The Council intercepts your communications. All of them. Every message you send to Earth, every report, every private conversation between your people. They collect them. And they share them. Lisa's face went pale. Share them? With who? With everyone, Seneth said. At the social gatherings of the elder species, your messages are played for entertainment. They laugh at your hopes. They mock your struggles. Your colony that was struck by the solar flare? The Kethra made a game of it. They bet on how many of your people would die before help arrived. The room went very quiet. Kevin's voice was low and dangerous. They bet on our people dying? Seneth nodded, her eyes filling with something that might have been shame. I'm sorry. Not all of us feel this way. Some of us see your species and we wonder what you might become. But most see only what you are now, small, weak, amusing. Daniel stood very still. His heart was beating fast, but his voice was steady. Why are you telling us this? Because it is wrong, Seneth said simply. And because I think you deserve to know the truth about where you stand. After she left, the three humans sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Lisa spoke. What do we do now? Daniel looked at her. His eyes were different now. The hope that had burned there for so many months was gone. In its place was something harder, colder. We document everything, he said. Every insult, every refusal, every act of disrespect. We send it all back to Earth encrypted in ways they can't break. And then we wait. Wait for what? Kevin asked. Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the gray wall that blocked their view. Wait for them to give us an answer we can't ignore. And then we make a choice. He didn't say what that choice would be. He didn't know yet, but he knew, with a certainty that sat like ice in his stomach, that something had changed. The dream of partnership, of joining the galactic family as equals, was dying. And something else was taking its place. Something quiet. Something patient. Something that would remember everything. 2 years had passed since the human delegation first arrived at Verith Prime. 2 years of small rooms and cold beds. 2 years of being ignored, mocked, and treated like children who had wandered into a room where they did not belong, but Daniel Ortega had not given up. Not yet. He had spent months preparing for this day. The formal request had been submitted through every proper channel. Every form had been filled out correctly. Every protocol had been followed to the letter. Today, humanity would ask for three things: full voting membership in the Galactic Council, fair trade agreements that treated Earth as an equal partner, and inclusion in the Mutual Defense Treaty that protected member worlds from external threats. The council chamber was full. All 12 elder species were represented. The gallery was packed with observers from 100 different worlds. Word had spread that the humans were making their final petition, and many had come to watch. Daniel suspected they had come to be entertained. He stood at the speaking platform and looked out at the faces before him. Crystal and scale and chitin and forms he had no words for. They watched him with expressions that ranged from bored to amused. Not one of them looked at him with respect. Daniel began to speak. He talked about humanity's rapid advancement. In just 80 years, they had gone from their first faster-than-light flight to colonies on 12 different worlds. He talked about their scientists, their artists, their dreamers. He talked about the resilience of the human spirit, the way his people had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and had always found a way to keep going. He talked about what humanity could offer. Their unique perspective, their creativity, their willingness to work hard and take risks that older, more cautious species might avoid. He spoke of partnership and cooperation, of building something together that would be greater than what any species could build alone. When he finished, he waited. The chamber was silent. High Speaker Vorn rose from his seat, the ancient crystal being moved slowly, his body catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. He looked at Daniel for a long moment, and there was something in those crystalline eyes that might have been pity. "We have heard your petition," Vorn said. "The council has considered it carefully." Daniel's heart was beating fast. Despite everything, despite all the insults and the mockery and the cold reality of the past 2 years, a small part of him still hoped, still believed that words and reason could change minds. "Your request for full voting membership is denied," Vorn said. "Your species lacks the maturity and experience to participate in decisions that affect the galaxy." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, but he kept his face still. "Your request for fair trade agreements is denied," Vorn continued. "Current trade terms are appropriate for a species of your development level." Lisa, sitting in the human section of the gallery, closed her eyes. "Your request for inclusion in the Mutual Defense Treaty is denied," Vorn said. "The treaty is reserved for species who can meaningfully contribute to collective security. At this time, humanity does not meet that standard." Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected this. He had prepared himself for this. But hearing the words spoken aloud in front of the entire galaxy still hurt more than he had imagined. "Is there any path forward?" he asked. His voice was calm. "Any way for humanity to earn the standing we seek?" Vorn tilted his crystalline head. "Perhaps in time. 1,000 years. Perhaps 2. The council does not act hastily." From the Kethra section, there was a sound. It started as a soft clicking, then grew louder. More voices joined in. The translator struggled to keep up, but Daniel didn't need it. He knew laughter when he heard it. 1,000 years? The Kethra representative said, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Perhaps by then your species will be mature enough to sit at the adult table." More laughter. The Sorn Dominion representatives hissed their approval. Even some of the usually quiet species joined in, making sounds that their cultures used to express mockery. The chamber filled with the sound of a dozen species laughing at humanity's dreams. Daniel stood at the platform and let the laughter wash over him. He watched the faces of the beings who were supposed to be the wise elders of the galaxy. He saw no wisdom there, only arrogance, only cruelty dressed up in the language of protocol and tradition. Something shifted inside him. The last spark of hope went out, and in its place there was only cold, clear certainty. When the laughter finally died down, Daniel spoke one more time. "I have one question," he said. His voice was quiet, but something in his tone made the chamber go still. "Is this the council's final position?" High Speaker Vorn regarded him with those ancient, glittering eyes. "It is," Daniel nodded. "Thank you for your clarity." He turned and walked toward the exit. Lisa and Kevin rose from their seats and followed him. The chamber was silent now, the laughter replaced by confusion. The humans were supposed to argue, to beg, to make angry speeches about fairness and justice. That was what developing species did when they were rejected, but Daniel Ortega did none of those things. He simply walked away. The doors closed behind the human delegation with a soft sound. In the chamber, the elder species exchanged glances. The Kethra representative made a dismissive gesture. "They will be back," he said. "They always come back." The Marathi representative, Deleth, said nothing. She watched the closed doors with an expression that none of her colleagues could read. In the corridor outside, Kevin finally broke the silence. "What now?" he asked. Daniel kept walking, his steps steady and measured. "Now we go home? And then?" Daniel stopped. He turned and looked at his team. Lisa, who had worked so hard to be heard. Kevin, who had swallowed his anger day after day. They had given everything to this mission. They had believed in it. And they had been laughed at for their belief. "And then," Daniel said, "we become something they will never laugh at again." He started walking again. Behind him, the great station of Verith Prime continued its slow spin through the stars. The elder species returned to their debates, already forgetting the small creatures who had dared to ask for a seat at their table. They would not forget for long. The human ship departed Verith Prime 72 hours after the Council's rejection. It left quietly, without ceremony, without angry transmissions or dramatic final statements. One moment it was docked at the station. The next it was gone. Ambassador Daniel Ortega spent most of the journey home in his cabin, writing. He filled page after page with careful notes about everything he had witnessed. Every insult. Every rejection. Every moment of mockery. He documented the betting on human deaths. He documented the intercepted communications played for entertainment. He documented the laughter in the council chamber when the ship finally entered Earth's solar system. Daniel felt something he had not felt in 2 years. He felt like he was home. The United Terran Assembly met in emergency session 3 days after his return. The Great Hall in Geneva was filled with representatives from every nation on Earth and every human colony in the stars. They listened as Daniel delivered his report. They watched the recordings he had brought back. They heard the laughter of the Galactic Council when he finished. The hall was silent for a long time. The vote that followed was unanimous. Not a single voice was raised in opposition. The decision was made in less than an hour. Humanity would withdraw. It happened slowly at first. Trade agreements were allowed to expire without renewal. Human merchants stopped visiting alien ports. Communication channels that had been kept open in hope of partnership were politely closed. When alien ships requested permission to dock at human stations, they were informed that facilities were no longer available. The few alien businesses that had established themselves in human space found their permits quietly revoked. They were given 30 days to close their operations and leave. Most of them barely noticed. Human space had never been important to them anyway. Within 6 months, the flow of ships and goods between humanity and the Galactic Council had slowed to a trickle. Within a year it had stopped entirely. The Council paid little attention. The elder species had their own concerns, their own ancient disputes and complex negotiations. The departure of one small, unimportant species barely registered in their deliberations. A few representatives made jokes about humans going to sulk in their corner of the galaxy. The jokes got smaller laughs each time, and eventually, no one bothered to make them anymore. But while the Council forgot about humanity, humanity did not forget about them. On Earth and in the colonies, everything changed. Resources that had been devoted to diplomacy and trade missions were redirected. Scientists who had studied alien technology now focused on developing human solutions to human problems. Engineers who had dreamed of working with galactic partners designed new ships that needed no outside help. The change in direction was dramatic. New propulsion systems were developed that allowed human ships to travel faster and farther than ever before. Defense grids were enhanced until every human world was protected by weapons that could turn back any attacker. Colony ships were constructed, larger and more advanced than anything humanity had built before, and then humanity did something the Council had never expected. They looked away. The galaxy mapped by the elder species was vast, but it was not infinite. There were regions they had explored and claimed, and regions they had dismissed as worthless. Too far from established trade routes, too empty of resources worth exploiting. Too dangerous or too difficult to colonize, humanity looked at those forgotten regions and saw opportunity. The first wave of expansion began 2 years after the withdrawal. 50 colony ships, each carrying 10,000 people, departed for the unexplored reaches of the galaxy. They traveled in directions no elder species had ever bothered to go. They found worlds the Council's maps marked as barren or hostile, and they made them into homes. It was not easy. The first colonies struggled. Some failed. People died in accidents and disasters that better support might have prevented. But humanity had learned something in the halls of Verith Prime. They had learned that no one was coming to help them. They could only rely on themselves, and so they adapted. They survived. They grew on a cold, rocky world at the edge of known space. A colony named New Horizon built the first human shipyard outside the Sol system. Within 5 years, it was producing ships that rivaled anything the elder species had ever seen, on a water world that the Marathi had dismissed as too shallow for their needs. Humans built floating cities that harvested energy from the tides and fish from the endless seas on a planet orbiting a dying star. Human scientists discovered a new form of energy that the Council's researchers had overlooked for centuries, each success built on the ones before. Each colony strengthened the others. A network began to form, connecting human worlds across vast distances of space. Trade routes were established. Defense agreements were signed. A new civilization was taking shape, far from the eyes of those who had laughed at its founders. Back on Verith Prime, the elder species continued their ancient games. They argued over boundaries that had been disputed for millennia. They negotiated treaties that would take centuries to implement. They monitored threats that moved too slowly for humans to comprehend, and slowly, so slowly that none of them noticed at first, the universe began to change around them. A plague appeared in Kethra space. Their doctors searched their databases for treatments, and they found references to human medical research that had been shared freely years ago. But when they tried to access the data, they found only empty files. The knowledge that might have saved millions of lives was gone. The Marathi discovered that the special materials they used to build their underwater habitats were becoming scarce. The original source had been human engineers working cheaply in exchange for goodwill that never came. Now those engineers were gone, and the Marathi could not replicate their work. Trade routes that had once been patrolled by human freighters became dangerous. Pirates moved into the gaps. Shipments were delayed or lost entirely, but the elder species did not connect these problems to the departure of one small, unimportant species. They blamed bad luck. They blamed each other. They blamed ancient enemies and new rivals. They did not blame their own. Arrogance. Not yet. In the unexplored regions of the galaxy, humanity continued to build. They were not angry. They were not seeking revenge. They were simply doing what they had always done. They were surviving. They were growing. They were becoming something new. And the universe was beginning to notice. 5 years had passed since the human delegation walked out of the council chamber. 5 years since the laughter had echoed off those ancient walls. To the elder species, it felt like the blink of an eye. To humanity, it had been a lifetime of change. High Speaker Vorn stood at the window of his private chamber and looked out at the stars. The view had not changed in 10,000 years. The same distant suns burned in the same patterns. The same darkness stretched between them. But something was different now. Something he could not quite name. The reports on his desk told a troubling story. The Kethra plague had spread to 7 worlds before it was contained. Millions had died. Their scientists had eventually developed a treatment, but it had taken 3 years longer than it should have. 3 years of suffering that might have been prevented. The Moratti were struggling with their habitat crisis. 2 of their largest underwater cities had been evacuated. The materials they needed simply did not exist anywhere in Council space. They had sent expeditions to find alternatives, but so far, all had failed. The Sorn Dominion was fighting a losing battle against piracy along their trade routes. Their mighty warships were designed for large-scale combat, not hunting small, fast raiders who struck and vanished. Their losses mounted with each passing month, but the most troubling report was the one about the Verith swarm. The swarm was an ancient enemy, a vast collective of beings from beyond the known galaxy who had probed the borders of Council space for millennia. They were patient and relentless, always testing, always looking for weakness. The Council's defense calculations had always accounted for their presence, building fleets and fortifications that would deter any invasion, but those calculations had been made when humanity was still part of the equation. The Velthari strategists had never consciously included the humans in their plans. How could they? Humanity was too young, too primitive, too unimportant. But somehow, in ways that were only now becoming clear, the models had factored in that small fleet of human ships. The patrols along the edges of explored space, the unpredictable tactics that made human commanders so difficult to fight. Without humanity, the math no longer worked. The swarm had noticed. Their probes were becoming more frequent, more aggressive. Scouts had been spotted deeper in Council space than ever before. The elder species pretended not to be worried, but Vorn could see the fear in their crystalline hearts. It was time to fix this. Vorn dispatched his finest diplomat to Earth. The Velthari envoy traveled in a ship of crystal and light, a vessel that had carried ambassadors to 100 worlds over 10,000 years. It was meant to impress, to remind the humans of the grandeur and power of the Galactic Council. The envoy arrived in Earth's solar system and requested permission to approach. The response came after a delay of several hours. Permission was granted. The envoy was directed to a small station orbiting Mars. Not Earth itself, not the heart of human civilization. A minor outpost on a cold, red world. The envoy swallowed his irritation and proceeded. He was met by a single human. The man was middle-aged, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes. He wore a simple uniform with no decorations or marks of rank. He introduced himself as Greg Patterson, Administrator of External Affairs. The envoy had expected to meet with the leader of humanity. Instead, he was speaking with what appeared to be a minor official. "I bring greetings from High Speaker Vorn and the Galactic Council," the envoy said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. "We wish to discuss the resumption of relations between our peoples." Greg Patterson nodded politely. "Thank you for making the journey. How can we help you?" The envoy launched into his prepared speech. He spoke of reconsidered terms, of new trade agreements that would be more favorable to humanity, of observer status being upgraded, perhaps even a path to eventual membership. The Council had reflected on its previous decisions and was prepared to welcome humanity back into the galactic community. Greg listened without interrupting. When the envoy finished, there was a moment of silence. "I appreciate the offer," Greg said, "but I'm afraid humanity is no longer interested in Council membership." The envoy blinked. "I'm sorry?" "We found new partners," Greg explained. "In the regions your maps call empty, we discovered species the Council never contacted. We've built trade networks, defense agreements, a whole community of worlds that share our values." He smiled slightly. "We're doing quite well, actually. But the Council offers protection," the envoy said. "The Verith swarm threatens us all. Surely you understand the danger." "We understand it very well," Greg replied. "We've been preparing for it while your Council argued about ancient treaties. Our fleets are ready. Our defenses are strong. We don't need your protection." The envoy felt something unfamiliar, a cold sensation spreading through his crystalline form. Was this what humans called fear? "What do you want?" he asked. "Name your terms." The council will consider any reasonable request. Greg shook his head. You misunderstand. We don't want anything from the council. We came to you once with open hands and hopeful hearts. We offered partnership. We offered friendship. And you laughed at us. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We learned something important that day. We learned that we could only rely on ourselves. That lesson has served us well. We have no anger toward the council. We wish you no harm. But we will never again place our fate in the hands of those who found our dreams amusing. The envoy returned to Verith Prime with his message. The council debated for weeks. Some argued for force. Some argued for more generous offers. Some argued for simply forgetting about humanity and focusing on their own problems. In the end, they did nothing. Because there was nothing they could do. High Speaker Vorn stood again at his window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in regions his maps called empty, humanity was building something new. Something the council had never imagined. Something born from rejection and grown strong in silence for 12,000 years. Vorn had guided the Galactic Council through challenges and crises. He had seen species rise and fall. He had watched empires crumble and new powers take their place. He had always known what to do. But now, for the first time in his ancient existence, he felt something that made his crystalline heart tremble. Uncertainty. The humans had not shouted or threatened or demanded revenge. They had simply walked away. And in that quiet departure, they had done something no species had ever managed in 12,000 years. They had made the Galactic Council afraid. Vorn watched the stars for a long time. Somewhere out there, humanity was laughing. But it was not a laugh of mockery or cruelty. It was the quiet laugh of those who had found their own path. And that, Vorn realized, was the most terrifying sound of all.